In California, a child's life is taken in the blink of an eye.
All right in there? My God.
A puzzling crime scene leaves police with little evidence and terrifying questions. The prosecution's case rests inside the mind of a vicious killer as they seek justice for a parent's worst nightmare. Oceanside, California is a resort town known for its relaxed atmosphere and lovely beaches. But in 1998, this small California town was ripped apart by a vicious murder. Prosecutor David Rubin was charged with making sense of the terrifying crime.
A lot of the murders I've handled have had, robbery as a motive, or something as a motive where I can point to it and say, ladies and gentlemen, he did this because he wanted the radio, or he did it because he wanted the car, or he wanted the whatever. But to have someone who went out to kill just for the sake of killing, that was different.
A few weeks before Thanksgiving, on November 14th, 1998, the Gerhardt clan had gathered in the resort town of Oceanside, California for a family reunion. Sharon Checky had made the 400-mile flight from her home near Sacramento with her 9-year-old son, Matthew.
Maybe go to the bathroom.
Matthew and his cousins had been playing on the beach as his aunts and uncles were cleaning up after their picnic dinner. It was just before 8 o'clock when he told his aunt he had to go to the bathroom and dashed into the public restroom. A few seconds later, she followed behind him. She heard gasping noises beyond the wall of the bathroom, and a young man rushed past her. When she ran inside, she found Matthew bleeding. He had been attacked. Matthew's uncle and cousins came running. Someone ran to get the boy's mother, Sharon. They discovered Matthew on the floor, his throat slashed.
What happened?
Matthew's uncle called the Oceanside Police Emergency Line. This is the actual tape recording.
Oceanside PD.
Yes, I need a an ambulance, a helicopter right now. We're at Oceanside Harbor. Someone stabbed by his little nephew. I need you to take something clean, and I need you to lay something on his throat to try to control that bullet breathing, but don't press too hard.
Within minutes, paramedics arrived as his uncle was attempting to revive him. But even their fast work and expertise could not save Matthew. He was pronounced dead on the scene. When police arrived, they began by interviewing Matthew's aunt. She told them she was outside the restroom as an unknown young man ran out. She described him as short, thin, with white skin and brown hair. A complete stranger. Amazingly, she saw the man again when she ran out to get help, but he disappeared in a parking lot. Just another young man with brown hair. Oceanside Police issued an all-points bulletin to the surrounding districts and sealed off the immediate area. They combed the beach, looking for anything that could point to the identity of Matthew's attacker. The next morning, police contacted the district attorney's office. Investigator Terry Jensen was assigned to assist the police in the case.
There was just not a lot of physical evidence at the crime scene, so finding witnesses, finding little pieces of this puzzle was crucial at this particular time. There was no suspect, there was no information that at that point in time was going to help them solve this case. So they were looking for anything.
A command center was set up in a trailer on the beach. Police officers fanned out to scour the area looking for any clue to lead them to the killer. They used metal detectors to search for the murder weapon. Because this was such a random, violent crime and the suspect was still on the loose, Prosecutor David Rubin joined Jensen at the scene.
But I just was not prepared for what I saw. There's just no way to prepare for that. We walk in this basically white bathroom and it's just sprayed with blood. You know, you want this person off the streets. Here's someone who was randomly killed, a young boy, for the thrill of it. This is someone we need to get arrested and we need to get him prosecuted.
To prosecute the killer, police first had to find him. They hoped he had left behind some clue at the crime scene. But police were having trouble determining what took place inside the bathroom. They hoped the story could be read in the blood evidence.
We need an expert to tell us as much information as we can get from this scene, from these blood spatters, what happened. We knew Matthew was dead. We knew that he was laying on the floor. Who, how, what happened? We needed a story. We needed something to help us figure out what happened.
After working the scene for 24 hours, investigators flew in Brian Kennedy, a blood spatter expert based in Northern California. He has spent 20 years studying the physics of murder, reading clues written in blood at crime scenes.
You know, they had the 9-year-old boy with his throat slit. Psychologically, it terrorizes the investigator. The investigator wants to know as much as they possibly can to solve this. The investigator feels anxiety for the survivors of the child. They feel their own inner emotions because they have children. They needed to know what had happened.
The story began to unfold to Brian Kennedy as he documented the scene.
Well, it was quite obvious that the wound that this child had suffered was potentially fatal from the instant. The arterial hemorrhage that covered the wall was overwhelming.
From the pattern of the blood, Kennedy deduced that Matthew had died instantly while he was standing up. Kennedy told the police the suspect was right-handed, that he came from behind with the knife and possibly held the wound open to bleed out as fast as possible. The autopsy confirmed Kennedy's findings. The medical examiner found a single surgical cut that severed the jugular veins and the right carotid artery, made with a double-edged knife. Police decided not to make public an additional injury: 5 stab wounds to Matthew's upper back.
It is generally the practice of every police agency not to release all of the information, so that you do have like a trump card sitting there so that only the individual that could have done this crime could tell you this particular piece of information.
It was a shocking story, and sorrow for the family poured out from communities all over California in the form of vigils and memorials. It also created an overwhelming sense of fear. Matthew was out of the sight of his family for mere seconds, and then he was gone. It was every parent's worst nightmare.
And there was a lot of panic from the community. You know, people take their kids to shopping malls, to beaches, and their children go into the bathrooms. What can a parent do to ever prevent this? And really the answer is there's nothing. And that's a very helpless feeling when you know that there is nothing you could possibly have done.
Investigators did what they could to find this killer. But they had no idea who he was or what he would do next. He seemed to have vanished. And indeed, he was, at that moment, boarding a bus to Los Angeles, where he would be free to hunt again. On Monday, November 16th, 1998, 2 days after the murder of Matthew Checkey, the city of Los Angeles was hiding his murderer. At 6:30 in the morning, 40-year-old Maria Luisa Rosales was on her way to work at a Los Angeles sewing factory when a young man with a backpack approached her. But when she stopped to answer his question, he attacked her. Luckily, her co-workers arrived and saw the attack. A woman screamed for help. It was happening so fast, the witnesses thought the young man was beating her with his fists. Another co-worker saw the commotion and rushed to help. The attacker saw he was outnumbered and tried to flee, but he was cornered. Surrounded by the three men, he dropped the knife and crumpled to the ground, pleading with the men not to touch him. They used his belt to bind his hands until officers arrived. Their quick action had saved Maria's life. Police found the subject sitting calmly on the ground. He said his name was Brandon Wilson and claimed it was all a mistake, that he too was chasing the attacker and the men grabbed him instead. But this time, there were witnesses to his bloody attack. The officers were mystified why Wilson attacked a total stranger. But when he started to talk, they contacted Oceanside District Attorney David Rubin.
The detectives up at LAPD in their Hollywood division asked him during the interview, had he ever done an attack like the one they had in Los Angeles before, and he just volunteered that yes, he had in Oceanside a couple of nights before he had killed a little boy. They called Oceanside Police Department to confirm that that was true, that that had occurred. They had some details from him that were not released to the press, so they knew that they had the right guy or someone who knew everything about this murder.
Although the young man's appearance didn't match the description of the Oceanside suspect, Wilson claimed he had stabbed Matthew 5 times in the back after slitting his throat. This was one of the details that only the killer could have known. Oceanside police immediately drove to Los Angeles to pick Wilson up and bring him in for questioning. Brandon Wilson was in custody that afternoon, only 2 days after the murder. And to their surprise, he was ready and willing to tell them anything they wanted to know. On video, on the record. Unsure of what Wilson might say, the prosecution made certain they were present.
While they're driving up there, I've already been told that this is occurring, and we arranged to meet at Oceanside Police Department, representatives of my office, so we can observe the interview as it occurs.
These are the actual videotapes of Brandon Wilson's confession to Detective McDonough of the Oceanside Police Department.
And what was your intent?
To kill.
To find a victim. To find a victim.
Right.
So you were hunting.
Exactly.
When Detective McDonough asked him why, Wilson claimed a voice told him to do it.
When people die and they have not attained enlightenment, they don't die. They come back. So when I kill them, I'm letting them be born again.
So you place yourself in a God position.
Yes.
Would that be accurate?
Yes.
So you feel, go ahead.
More like a devil position, but still.
Investigator Jensen from the DA's office realized they might be facing a case of legal insanity. The investigation would now move from simple physical evidence to more complicated psychological evidence.
As we're watching Brandon, not only his demeanor in the interview room, how he's answering the questions, some of the things that he's saying, some of the comments that he's making about God and other aspects of the case, caused us to realize, very early on in the interview, that one of the possible defenses was going to be the issue of insanity.
There's those people that are lambs, right? I'm the lion, right? And they're the lambs, okay? They're there for me to kill them, okay? They're happy. I'm not. I don't have the ability to be happy anymore. I gave that up. Why did I give that up? Doesn't everybody want to be happy? I gave it up. Why did I do it? So other people can be happy.
So you consider yourself a martyr?
Absolutely.
Okay, what's your cause?
Life. Love.
Does he hang out in Oceanside?
The prosecutors believed Wilson was unbalanced.
He's not doing that. He's not.
They began to try and determine whether he understood the difference between right and wrong.
I had to get the answer.
We got in there asking him questions about right and wrong, because right and wrong is a critical part of the test for is somebody sane or insane in California.
Yeah, it was serrated on one side.
But Wilson gave conflicting answers. Yes, he knew society would think murder was wrong, but society didn't understand his mission.
Tell me what you believe right and wrong is.
The same thing.
Explain it.
There's no difference between right and wrong.
Okay, help me understand that.
Everything's right.
The prosecutor began to direct the detective questioning Wilson. They were looking for something in Wilson's past that might give them a clue to his state of mind.
Yeah, I don't know.
We wanted his biography. So at one point we said, go back in and start him talking about himself so we can start tracking his travels and tracking where he's grown up.
Wilson told police he had done a lot of drugs as a teenager. And though he had the grades to go to college, instead he jumped from job to job in his hometown of LaCroix, Wisconsin. He said he left home the day after his 20th birthday, financing his travels with an insurance settlement from a car accident. Wilson traveled the West for a few months to Seattle, Colorado, Oregon. He described himself as shy, antisocial. He was also taking a lot of hallucinogenic drugs. He said he was camping alone in the California desert one night and took 5 times the normal dose of LSD. Then he had an epiphany, which he explained to police.
I figured out everything. I figured out love and what I have to do to get that. Right? Right? What I'm talking about.
I'm with you.
And so I knew what I had to do. So I was like, okay, I'm in this really small town. I wasn't yet thinking that I actually wanted to get caught. Right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Oceanside and do it. Because there's more people, it'll slip through the cracks, right?
Wilson claimed he suddenly knew that he was supposed to kill. He had the realization that it was his job to balance good and evil by committing a murder. Wilson, having abandoned his car a month earlier, boarded a bus for Oceanside. In his own words, on the night of the murder, he was a hunter, looking for the perfect, pure victim. Though he passed a couple of women on the beach, he said he decided not to kill them. Then he saw the Gerhardt cousins on the beach playground.
Bam. This is it. This is it. This is it. This is the one. Follow them.
I need to go to the bathroom.
No. You're 5 minutes from home. You can wait.
I'm going anywhere.
Stand up. Sit back and away. And here's Mother's voice.
To Prosecutor Rubin, Brandon Wilson's actions did not seem like those of an insane man. Wilson was in complete control when he took Matthew Checky's life.
He is quick and almost surgical about this strike against little Matthew. I mean, this is a one slit of this kid's throat. I mean, this was just, he knew exactly what he was doing.
And what else?
In my view of it, we have someone who is a thrill killer.
After Wilson's interrogation, the Oceanside police retraced the confessed killer's steps, including his motel room, to get the forensic corroboration they would need for the prosecutor's case.
In the search of Brandon Wilson's hotel room where he had stayed, they found blood in the pipes underneath the sink.
Get that. Get a bag, tag this.
It was obvious that Brandon Wilson had shaved his head after the murder. Detectives visited local barbershops to talk with anyone who might have seen him. Hairdresser Lorraine Vulich remembered Wilson because of his unusual reaction.
He never looked in the mirror, never touched his head, and usually when you do bald haircuts, it's that drastic. Someone they'll at least make a joke about it, or they'll touch their head, at least turn around and look in the mirror, because when we do haircuts, we face them backwards. Then he just got up and paid the cashier, with his change, and then left.
Then Wilson boarded a bus north to Los Angeles, only to attack again. Investigator Jensen pored over the evidence police collected. Police from the LAPD gave them the knife Wilson used to stab Maria Rosales. Jensen suspected it was the same knife that killed Matthew Checky. In Wilson's hotel room, they found some books, including a book of mythology. Jensen was looking for any evidence supporting the prosecution's assertion that Brandon Wilson was sane, and he killed simply for the thrill of it. He flew to Seattle to see if any of Wilson's friends could shed light on Wilson's state of mind.
We were able to find out in some of the interviews that he had thought about killing animals, that he had thought about killing before. When the interview with his brother and an interview with a friend up in Seattle, Washington, he talked about what it would be like to see death, to look someone in the eye as they were dying and stare death right in the face.
Brandon Wilson had become obsessed with facing death. While police continued gathering evidence, prosecutor David Rubin assembled his team and began working on the formal charges.
Because we had a confession, it was no longer a whodunit. It was a what is it? What degree of murder is this?
The prosecution decided to seek charges of first-degree murder with the special circumstances of lying in wait. Those special circumstances, if proven, made Brandon Wilson eligible for the death penalty in the state of California. Shortly before the arraignment, the court appointed Wilson a lawyer. Kurt Owen was part of a high-profile team of public defenders specializing in capital cases. In Owen's first meeting with his client, he found Wilson a mystery.
When I first met Brandon, he was a very quiet, polite, intelligent young man. I could not put him together with the accusations and what I knew had apparently happened. It was seemed very normal to me at the time.
At Wilson's first hearing on the murder charge, Owen was in for a shock. After he pled not guilty on his client's behalf, Wilson took matters into his own hands in front of a courtroom packed with television cameras.
I did it. I killed him. I killed the little boy.
Wilson's lawyer tried to stop his new client from talking.
I'm trying to keep him quiet because he just made what's known as a judicial confession in front of 8 television cameras and 4 still cameras, which is going to make the case a little difficult to deal with. But at that point, the judge entered the plea and set us out.
Wilson was back in court a week later, this time much subdued. Owen began with the only defense he could. If he wanted to save his client's life, he would have to try and prove Brandon Wilson was insane.
There was nothing that Brandon could gain. It was not robbery, it was not sex, it was not revenge. This was a totally clinical selection of an unknown person to offer as a sacrifice to God. And it seemed to me that any juror is going to look at that, is going to have questions in their own mind as to whether or not this person is at all, Brandon, was at all sane. The whole point was to use the incident itself to illustrate that this is just crazy conduct. You can't explain it any other way.
In a court of law, insanity is not a scientific or a moral state. In California, it has a clear legal definition. And from the beginning, the prosecutors knew their mission would be to prove that Wilson was a child murderer who was sane. Brandon Wilson was in custody within 2 days of the murder of 9-year-old Matthew Checky.
It is odd, actually. It is, but it's the way things are. I didn't do it. I didn't.
Wilson confessed, claiming he got a message telling him to kill. His guilt was not in question. His sanity was.
And correct me if I'm wrong, man.
I don't want it to be this way. I wish it wasn't, but it is.
Okay.
On January 14th, 1999, Wilson entered 2 pleas before the court. Guilty and not guilty by reason of insanity, opening the door for a sanity hearing where a jury would ultimately decide if he would face the death penalty or be sentenced to a hospital for the criminally insane.
What happens on a sanity trial is that the defense goes first because they have the burden of proving that their client is insane.
Determining Wilson's sanity now was up to the forensic psychiatrists. Wilson was examined, analyzed, and given a battery of tests by a total of 5 mental health professionals.
What would you think it sounded like? It was God.
Legal insanity is a defense of last resort, used in a small percentage of cases because it is rarely successful.
It wasn't either.
The definition is not scientific, it is legal. Dr. Charles Rabner, independent of the defense and the prosecution, was one of the psychiatrists appointed by the court.
Mr. Wilson.
The state of California is interested in knowing what his mind was at the time. Did he know what he was doing was wrong? And if he did know it was wrong, could he have stopped himself if he tried hard enough? Essentially, that's it.
In order to determine his mental state, the psychiatrist studied everything from his sense of reality to possible brain damage.
Now,
Medication is
They were given the opportunity to study the Oceanside interrogation tape.
artificial control.
Detective McDonough's questions about right and wrong became the focal point of the psychiatrist's evaluation.
Can't do that. That's just putting it off. Okay. Now, do you feel you have pretty good control of yourself? Yeah. Okay. Do you consciously know what you're doing when you do it? Yes. Okay. Do you know the difference between right and wrong? I do. Give me an example. Okay. Okay. How did you... Is killing this boy right or wrong? Do you know how long it would take to explain?
As the trial began, Wilson's use of LSD was discussed, as well as past psychiatric records.
my opinion was that although he suffered...
Dr. Rabner submitted to the court that Wilson's delusions didn't force him to kill Matthew, only justified it for him.
Nothing to prevent him from knowing or understanding.
Rabner's conclusion was that Brandon Wilson understood the nature of his act and killed because he wanted to. Defense attorney Kurt Owen hired expert Dr. Donna Zimmerman to examine Wilson.
My opinion is that Mr. Wilson...
She found evidence that Wilson was indeed insane.
...affective disorder. It's a combination of...
She felt that Brandon Wilson suffered from a psychotic disorder, which made him incapable of distinguishing between right and wrong.
What he'd done was wrong. And...
But testimony from a nationally famous expert for the prosecution, Dr. Park Dietz, was substantially different. On the stand, Dietz used the events following Matthew's murder to prove his assertion that Wilson knew full well what was right and wrong.
What does that kind of tell us?
He continued to flee and at one point saw what he believed was an approaching police car, at which point he dove into a culvert in order to hide from the advancing lights and not be observed. When what he thought was a police car had passed, he then continued fleeing to the hotel, his motel room, and as soon as possible he got inside his motel room. He washed his hands, he washed the blood off the knife. So all of those aspects of flight, of trying not to be captured immediately, are an indication of his knowing that what he'd done was wrong.
Dietz went on to explain how the act of Wilson getting a haircut demonstrated his need to disguise himself, again demonstrating that he knew what he had done was wrong.
It's actually important that he acknowledged that he knew society would regard his actions as wrong, despite his having the opinion that they were somehow justified. That a defendant's merely having the personal opinion that what they're doing is right does not make it so if they recognize that society would condemn what they're doing.
Dietz also did not lend credence to the defense assertion that Wilson was mentally ill and could not understand right and wrong.
What's not true is that just because someone is sick, they're not responsible. The law requires not just that somebody be sick, but also that that sickness made them unable to know what they were doing or unable to know it was wrong.
The jury was getting an array of opinions, 5 different experts. Soon they would have to decide whom to believe and whether or not Wilson belonged in a hospital or a jail cell.
You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending before this
As the
court
trial
shall
to
be the
determine
truth,
his
the whole
sanity
truth, and
neared its
nothing but the truth,
conclusion,
so help you God.
Brandon Wilson took
Thank
the
you. Please
stand.
come forward and take a seat in the witness stand.
He wanted to plead his own case. His defense attorney, Kurt Owen, hoped that his own words would reveal his insanity to the jury. Owen began asking Brandon Wilson about his past. Brandon said he had a happy, normal childhood in a small town in Wisconsin. But at the age of 13, he became a pawn of his parents' divorce. At that point, he started taking drugs. He isolated himself from his friends and holed up in his room reading philosophy and mythology. He had even been arrested for attempting to steal a car and had other run-ins with the law, including the vandalizing of a graveyard and playing mailbox baseball. Wilson explained on the stand how he tried to escape the anger with LSD.
Yes. This is going to sound strange to you. Okay? Hit me. I believe that if I would have killed my mother when I was 16 years old, that the world could have ended in the year 2000, and we could all be free from this. We wouldn't have to suffer. I believe that because I didn't do it, we're all going to suffer for another 1,000 years.
Wilson explained to the jury how he left home on his 20th birthday to travel and try and figure out what he wanted to do with his life. It was on this trip that he realized that he had an evil side which had been placed in him for one reason: to kill someone. In his closing arguments, prosecutor David Rubin characterized Wilson as someone who knew that what he did was wrong and killed for pleasure.
And he goes out. And we know by his actions, no matter how you approach this case, that he knows the nature and quality of the act. He understands the nature and quality of the act. And he can distinguish between right and wrong. Right and wrong because he knows it was legally wrong and he knew it was morally wrong, as we, a community, see that. That's what I told you in an opening statement 2 weeks ago. I think this evidence more than proves this. Defendant Wilson is sane, and I'm asking you to so find. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin.
Defense attorney Kurt Owen used his closing arguments to rebut the prosecution and assert that Wilson was incapable of grasping right and wrong.
Mr. Rubin and I apparently completely disagree on where the battlefield in this case lies. It is not, and I think I've said this before, whether the defendant appreciated that the objective standard of right and wrong, both morally and legally, society's standard, said what he was doing was wrong, both morally and legally. The point is that he did not and could not understand the moral nature and quality of the act.
The case now rested in the hands of the jury. After deliberating for 2 days, on September 28, 1999, the jury returned with a decision.
We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Brandon H. Wilson, was sane at the time of the commission of the crimes charged in the information namely murder in the first degree in violation.
Prosecutors were gratified by the decision, but their work was far from over. They would now have to argue that Wilson deserved the ultimate punishment, death. And for that, the prosecutor would have to lay out the horrifying details of Matthew's murder and the effect on the loved ones left behind.
He will be brought in by God to the inner circle of law.
Up against this horror, Wilson's defense attorney spared nothing to try to save the life of a young man he believed was seriously mentally ill and deserved mercy. Brandon Wilson had been declared sane. Because he admitted in court he killed 9-year-old Matthew Checky, he had to face one more trial, a proceeding to decide his punishment. Because Matthew was ambushed by his murderer, Brandon Wilson was eligible for the death penalty.
Shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. Please
The jurors would now hear the testimony of the family Matthew Checky left behind. Prosecutor Rubin called Matthew's mother Sharon to the stand.
Please state your full name and spell your last name.
He asked her to describe her son for the jury.
He liked to draw a lot. He said he wanted to be an engineer or a cartoonist or an architect.
All right. And was he creative?
Very creative.
Tell us about that.
He used to like to make things out of things around the house, you know. Paper towel rolls, cans. He used to like to make robots, and he used to write stories about aliens, and he just had a great imagination.
You know, maybe we have a quick sidebar on something I'd like to mark.
As Sharon Checky was overtaken by her emotions, Rubin paused. The answers to his next line of questioning would weigh heavily on all who heard them.
Probably the most difficult time in the whole trial for me was when Matthew's mother, Sharon Checky, got up on the stand and testified and had to tell about what she saw that night.
Yes.
And when you got into the bathroom, what did you see?
I ran into the bathroom, and Matt was on the floor, lying down on his back on the floor, and he had a gray jacket up to his neck, and there was blood all over the walls.
What did you do?
I kneeled down next to him, and I put my hands on his hair, and I said, "Matt, it's Mom. I'm here. Hang in there, baby. I love you."
Did you try to give him CPR as well?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you do to give him CPR?
I breathed in his mouth, I think twice.
Okay, did you see any reaction at all?
Yes.
What did you see?
I saw blood come out of the side of his mouth, and I saw his eyes roll on the back of his head.
I think at the time you thought that might be a good sign.
I didn't know. I didn't see his throat. I didn't know that he was so badly injured.
When Sharon Checky, Matthew's mom, got off the stand and came out of the courtroom, I was the first person that she saw. And she fell into my arms, almost such a relief, and just cried, just wept. And that was probably the most difficult time I have had in my career as a law enforcement officer.
Brandon Wilson then approached the stand.
Please state your full name and spell your last name for the record.
Brandon H. Wilson, W-I-L-S-O-N.
He wanted to speak on his own behalf. Kurt Owen tried to stop him, fearing he would talk himself into the death penalty. But Wilson's obsession with death could not be contained.
Yes.
he demanded to make a statement,
I have advised you
uninterrupted.
not to make a statement. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You wish to disregard my advice and make a statement anyway.
I do.
What is that statement, sir?
First of all, I'd like to say that I feel no remorse whatsoever for what I've done. I would do it again in a second if I had the chance. I've explained to you my position here. My whole purpose in life is to help destroy your society. You people are here as representatives of that society, and as such, you should do everything in your power to rid the world of me.
Thank you.
Execute me.
Thank you. That will be sufficient.
Mr. Rubin, any questions?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down, Mr. Wilson. Both counsel, Mr. Wilson's present, Mr. Owen.
Families.
In closing, Kurt Owen begged the jury to show mercy and put Wilson in prison where he could be treated for his mental delusions.
From the beginning, the question has always been, why? Why? How could it happen? But there is treatment available for mental illness within the California Department of Corrections. Treatment that might well restore Brandon Wilson to the Brandon Wilson that used to live in Wisconsin. For this is a heartbreaking case. And your lives are never going to be the same either. Your lives are never going to be the same. You didn't ask for this job, but you were selected by Mr. Rubin and by me because we felt that you could take upon yourselves this incredible burden of trying to decide between life and death for Mr. Wilson. Now, there is no
The defense
requirement in
argued
the
that with
law.
a sentence of life in prison, Brandon Wilson could be treated for his mental illness.
So what?
But prosecutor David Rubin argued that treatment for Brandon Wilson was not the
This
issue.
defendant was at the time. So he's treatable. So what? We're not here to determine if he's treatable. We're here to determine what's the punishment here. What do we do with him? What do you want to say to him? I mean, here's a fact.
On October 6th, the jury of 12 people came back with its unanimous decision. Brandon Wilson was sentenced to death. After asking the court to execute him, the jury granted Brandon Wilson's request. For Terry Jensen, the verdict was a sign the system worked.
Justice took care of Brandon Wilson. He will never hurt anybody again. That Matthew and his family, justice served them. Society, justice served them. And that personally, for me as an investigator, that I did everything that I could possibly do to make sure that the system worked.
Brandon Wilson sits on death row in California's San Quentin prison. It will be years before he faces his ultimate penalty and stares death in the face.